Security surrounding Gold Nest was suffocatingly tight. No less than half a dozen times were we stopped for inspection by the bird police on our way to the front gate, and it seemed that with each subsequent inspection came a new hoop for us to jump through. This was understandable, of course, being that the nation of Zintril was in wartime, but nevertheless I'd be lying to say the needless nonsense didn't pick at my nerves something fierce. Finally, after what felt like hours spent slogging through the hellish maze of red tape, our transport was brought to a gentle halt in front of the main entrance. Waiting there to greet us was a small army of heavily armed guards. "Out! Now!" one of them demanded, clutching their Rakasi rifle close to the chest as they gestured for us to exit the vehicle. Offering the soldiers a brief salute as he dropped to the ground, Teague calmly parted the armored sea as he walked toward the entrance, disregarding the guards' orders as though he himself were bulletproof. Frankly, I was surprised that not one of them opened fire on the brave Red Scale. Clearly, the trigger discipline of this lot far outpaced that of Kirak's regiment. Speaking of which, the lieutenant and his men were next to step out. Following a parting gesture from their leader, the men were quickly shepherded off, presumably to somewhere less high security than the Prime Minister's office. The next closest to our open exit was Vavi. For all her prior bravery, the Kafel scientist nonetheless appeared to be somewhat shaken by the immaculate squadron of soldiers awaiting us. Naturally, being a good friend, I decided it best that I step out first. Most of the guards stood at least a good head taller than me, but knowing their biological and technological capabilities ultimately put a damper on their display. Walking through the corridor of guardsmen, a strange, invasive thought crept into my mind. Let's say you did want to fight them. It began, prompting me to look around at the 20-odd soldiers stood in front of our transport. How many do you think you could kill? A curious thought that, one I had no intention of testing. Nevertheless, however, I almost immediately found myself running calculations in my mind. While a more combat-savvy human might be able to beat all of them at once, I figured that someone more average, like me, may be able to take 10 or so with brute force alone. Following my own exit, Vavi reluctantly stepped out into the soldier's pathway, remaining close to me as I myself followed Teague into the impressive, almost castle-esque building known presumably as Gold Nest. Finally, last in line to make his exit was Chot, elegantly strutting past the soldiers as they knelt down before him in what I presumed was a military gesture. "Now then," the ambassador began, smoothing over his plumage until not a single feather stuck out in rebellion. "Salkim should be just upstairs. Allow me to take the lead from here." He bloviated, gesturing for Teague and Vavi to step aside as he proceeded to guide us up through the building's labyrinthine myriad of halls and stairways. Throughout this journey, I took the liberty of looking over our surroundings as we walked past distinctive pieces of priceless-looking junk. Medieval era weapons, ridiculously ornate headdresses, and all sorts of artifacts all pent up in fancy glass cases. From this, I deduced their value to largely be attributable to those who owned these pieces. However, due to the plaques being both very small and written in a script I hardly understood the basics of, I wasn't exactly able to confirm this hypothesis. Eventually, our travels brought us to a particularly interesting hallway. Lining the right-hand wall of this corridor were a variety of paintings, each one depicting a different Kafel. At first, I wasn't entirely sure who these aliens were supposed to be, but upon reaching the end of this lineup, I was thankfully clued in by the final painting's graciously large plaque. Salkim Koryani, it read, plastered beneath the image of a rather youthful male with a weary look in his eyes. "The Hall of Ministers," Vavi breathed softly, her expression one of utter awe and wonder. "Normally you only see mock-ups of this place in movies," she continued, prompting from Chot a prideful trill. "Only our most important of guests get to see this place in person," he began, stopping alongside me to admire Prime Minister Salkim's portrait. Of course, that's more for security reasons, given its proximity to the nest egg itself. "The what?" I asked, turning the phrase over in my mind as I contemplated possible meanings. Perhaps it's like their Oval Office? I considered, a guess which was immediately confirmed by Teague cutting in to define the place. "Nest egg is Salkim's office?" he began excitedly, rushing down the hall's remainder before finally reaching the closed door at its end and unlocking it with a key previously dormant upon his belt. "And this is the waiting room," he continued, ushering us inside with a series of animated gestures. True to the Red Scale's word, beyond this door I found myself stood amidst a swanky-looking little lobby. Behind a desk opposite to the door from which we had entered stood an exceptionally prim and proper-looking receptionist. Hello there," she chirped, producing from a nearby cabinet one sheet of paper bound against a clipboard. "Duravia," Chot replied, allowing the receptionist to mark down our presence before continuing. "As you no doubt have been informed by now, I have an urgent appointment with the Prime Minister." "And your posse?" she asked, waving a claw toward the rest of us, as Teague casually strolled over to a nice leather cushion set against the room's near right corner. "They are to remain here for now. Teague, keep these two occupied while I share what we know with Salcom." "You got it, boss." The Red Scale grinned, offering up a semi-sarcastic salute to Chot as he plucked from the receptionist's desk a small keyring, carefully selecting from amongst the rest a single mundane-looking key and slotting it into the door beside her desk. "So then," Teague continued, turning back towards myself and Vavi before gesturing to a pair of cushions just across from him. "Want to play Baron's Quarry?" At first, the name was entirely unfamiliar to me. However, upon Vavi's enthusiastic affirmation, I elected to simply play along. What followed was a surprisingly fun hour spent learning the rules of a classic Kafel card game. Explaining it simply, the game was about coal barons, each attempting to economically outmaneuver the other players. Resource cards could be traded for various goods and other buffs, and the game ended when one player could successfully siphon away the income of all others. By the end of our game's second round, I was beginning to understand why Vavi had been so very pleased upon mention of the game. She was fucking ruthless at it. "How the hell are you so good at this?" I laughed, regarding her with a smile as she effortlessly routed Teague into bankruptcy. "My father taught me to play!" "Well, he must be a damn menace then," the Red Scale snarked, laying down his cards with a sigh of defeat. "Seriously, remind me never to bet money against your old man." "Well, Vavi whistled awkwardly, holding her handful of cards closer to her face as though in an effort to conceal the expression beneath. "He was really good at the game." Realizing far too late his own accidental insensitivity, Teague recoiled from the pair of us as though he'd been slapped. "I'm sorry," he choked, casting his gaze downward in shame. "I hope I didn't salt the wound too much, miss." "It's fine," Vavi shrugged, dejectedly discarding her hand upon the carpeted floor. "The war took him from us years ago. I've gotten over it somewhat, so don't feel too bad." Fortunately for my socially anxious self, the situation's awkwardness was quickly dispelled when from the door to Salcom's office returned Ambassador Chot. "Mr. Andrew," he began professionally, further pulling open the door and gesturing for me to enter Salcom's room alongside him. "The Prime Minister wishes to speak with you personally now." And so, steeling myself with a deep breath, I stood by my seat beside Vavi, and alongside the ambassador entered into Salcom's office. The inside of this office was pretty much precisely what one might expect for President Parakeet. Arranged atop the room's large, semicircular centerpiece of a desk were piles upon piles of bills and books. There, framed betwixt two paper stacks and illuminated by the large window at his back, was the man for whom we'd arrived. "You must be the alien," Salcom began, cocking his head curiously as he eyed me up and down. "Chot has told me much about you and your people. However, I simply could not resist speaking with you in person." "An honor, sir." I nodded, straightening out my posture and replicating the salute previously modeled for me by Teague. "I trust you have a lot of questions." "One could say that." The Prime Minister chuffed, gesturing toward a pair of seat cushions across the desk from himself. "I suggest you sit down. We're going to be here a while." Seated across from Prime Minister Salcom, the understanding of my importance here once again collided with me at full throttle. I was the first human to meet with an alien world leader. My actions here, for better or worse, would reflect upon all of mankind. "I must begin by thanking you sincerely for your ongoing cooperation, Mr. Human," Salkim began, producing from beneath his desk a copied blueprint of the Whitebird jets I designed, and sliding it across his desk toward me. The technology you've given us so far will soon provide Zintril a crucial edge against the Temenian regime. And there's plenty more where that came from, I quipped, adopting my finest facsimile of confidence as I regarded with a cordial nod the Kafel head of state. Judging by the way Salkim spoke of them, however, it clearly was not my current contributions about which he intended to inquire. Leaning forward across his desk so as to get a better look at the extraterrestrial, extra-archesial, seated in his office, the Prime Minister promptly proceeded. Technology, however, is not the bramble in which I roost. He clicked softly, momentarily reaching under his desk to procure from a cabinet therein a heart-shaped bottle and 3 small shot glasses. Tell me, human, can your kind consume alcohol? That we can, I grinned, merrily accepting the small repository of ethanol on offer before quickly sucking down the entire thing. The shot was startlingly weak, more akin to a light beer than anything substantial. Nevertheless, my display of constitution evidently came as a surprise to the Prime Minister, who promptly sipped from his own glass as though it were a far stronger draught. Clearly, your people have a vastly higher threshold for intoxication than we Kafel do, Salkim noted amusedly, once again filling to the brim my shot glass before proceeding. Speaking of your people, he continued, pausing for a moment to imbibe a small sip of flaccid inebriant, I've a few questions regarding them if you would care to entertain them. Understanding this as less so a request than a command, I nodded along in gentle compliance and, corralling my nerves as best I could, replied, Perhaps I've a few answers then. What is it you wish to know, sir? Firstly, Salkim began, holding up a singular claw as though to indicate the question number. How long have your kind known about us? Are you the first to land here, or have there been others prior to you? Momentarily giving pause as I contemplated how best to reply to this, I eventually landed upon an appropriate answer. I'm the first human to visit this system. To my knowledge, the rest of humanity has no idea you Kafel exist. Long silence befell the Prime Minister's nest egg as he pondered my first answer, no doubt not one he had been expecting. All right, he continued, accepting my answer at face value. That brings to mind another thing that's been nagging at me. What precisely is your purpose here? If I'm to be frank with you, I wasn't supposed to be here at all, I sighed, recalling the series of increasingly unlikely cosmic dice rolls which had brought me before an alien civilization. I was on my way to a system we humans call Trappist when my ship's thrusters malfunctioned. Being at that time in cryosleep, I was unable to correct my trajectory, and so I overshot it by a few dozen light years. Quite the miscalculation, Salkim replied, his voice betraying a hint of fair incredulity as he mulled over my underwhelming answer. Fortunately, Chot was quick to hop in and confirm my story. I, too, was skeptical at first regarding this claim, he interjected, waving toward me for emphasis before proceeding. However, Andrew's alibi has remained consistent so far, and he's given us no reason to doubt him. Of course, Salkim nodded, gingerly refilling my glass before once again imbibing a gentle sip from his own. Human! You must forgive my skepticism, he requested, reclining back into his seat, which looked to be some sort of presidential beanbag chair. You understand my concerns are with the safety of Zinril and by extension the planet on which it resides, yes? Responding to his question with a wordless nod, I spared myself a moment's glance back toward the door behind which resided Vavi and Taig. Is it all right if I ask you a question, Salkim? Go right ahead. Carefully selecting my next words so as to avoid any negative connotations, I took in a deep breath and with alongside the exhalation murmured out my query. What exactly are your plans for me once your war is finished? I asked, monitoring carefully the Prime Minister's mannerisms in search of any tells which might indicate deception. To be honest, I've not really thought that far ahead, clicked Salkim with seemingly genuine amusement. Much as I loathe to admit it, you are too valuable an asset to simply release. Following the war, however, I will do all in my power to accommodate your desires whilst you continue to work with us. And what about the public? Will they ever get to know about me, or will my existence be relegated to a state secret? Offering up in reply a curious hum of contemplation, The Prime Minister visibly considered his reply. "That depends," he murmured, casting his gaze down toward the stacks upon stacks of paper cluttering up his desk. "Which would you prefer, Mr. Human?" "The former," I stated bluntly. "Well," Salcom began, shaking his head ponderously as though debating between two separate internal monologues, "it could perhaps be possible to ease them into the idea. What do you think? You could start by taking bacteria samples from my ship." I grinned, holding apart my thumb and pointer finger as though grasping an invisible vial. "Say you found alien life clung to a meteor." "After that," Chot interrupted once more, clearly not used to being the conversational third wheel, "you can tell that you recovered alien technology and reverse-engineered some of it." Nodding along with this plan, Salkim quickly picked up from there where his ambassador left off. "Then," he clicked softly, his eyes flickering with activity as he contemplated the various factors, "all that'll be left is telling them about you. That could work," he concluded, leaning forth once more and hunching over slightly to place himself on eye level with me. "Now back to my questions," the Prime Minister warbled, his tone suddenly far more serious than before. "Let's say, human, that your kind invaded us today. What chance would you say we stand?" The answer, of course, was obvious. My delivery, however, much less so. Several moments meandered past as I mentally mocked up various lines of speech. In the end, however, there was simply no way to sugarcoat it. "Zero," I sighed, shaking my head grimly as the images of a full scale between my own kind and theirs insidiously inscribed themselves to the back of my eyelids, lingering there with each solitary blink. "You'd be forced to surrender in a matter of days, if not wiped out entirely." "As I feared," Salkim continued, standing from his chair and with exceptional grace weaving around his desk before pausing at the door. "Come with me," he commanded, stepping into the lobby and promptly continuing down the hall of famous faces. Quickly standing up from my crisscrossed position and stepping outside in pursuit of the Prime Minister with Chot close behind. Clearing the lobby in a few jogging strides, I gestured briefly for the rest of our crew to follow as Salcom guided us down a stairway. "Sir?" Chot stuttered meekly, nudging past me with a polite coo of apology before finally coming up beside the Prime Minister. "Are you sure it's a good idea to be parading Andrew about like this? What if someone who sees him doesn't keep their mouth shut?" "Calm yourself," Salcom replied, brushing aside Chot's concerns with little more than a wave of his vestigial wing. "Over 3/4 of my staff were called off today for this meeting," he then proceeded, turning a corner on the staircase before leading us down into what looked like some sort of dining room. "I assure you, nobody who sees him here is so loose-jawed as to go telling about it." "Nevertheless," the ambassador squawked, his gentle veneer of submission melting away to reveal beneath a more commanding tone befitting a veteran like himself. "Would it not have been better to just remain in your office?" Light, amused clicking emanated from the Prime Minister's throat as he regarded the small posse assembled behind himself. "I'd rather we not sully my office with dinner crumbs, thank you very much," he retorted, revealing to us in the process his intentions regarding the room in which we now stood. Taking a seat beside the Prime Minister and opposite to Chot, I gestured for Vavi to join at my other side as we awaited Salkim's personal chef, a role apparently requiring top-level clearance. "Andrew." "Yes?" Salkim began, picking up his utensils and gesturing toward me with them. "That would be me," I shrugged, straightening myself out as much as possible, too, as to at least look somewhat closer to the impressive height of a kafel. For a moment, the Prime Minister seemed to hesitate, leaving in place of his voice a deep and pervasive silence. When he next opened his mouth, I got the curious feeling that whatever was about to come out was very different than the original question for which he called me by name. Just wanted to say that you're going to love what my cook has prepared," he chirped cheerily, turning away from me and glancing toward an engraved wooden door on the room's far side. "Thrick is a culinary genius. I told him to prepare his finest dishes for us to sample, so do ready yourself for the amazement to come." Minutes of casual conversation rapidly bled into an hour as we all collectively awaited this miracle chef spoken so highly of not only by Salkim, but also Chot and Teague. However, after a long period of absence from the cook, Salkim visibly grew impatient. "Where is he?" the Prime Minister hissed in annoyance, glancing about the room as though expecting some form of prank to befall us. Then, as though in response to his question, the lights suddenly flickered out. "That's strange," Chot murmured quickly, excusing himself from his seat and alongside Teague approaching a small back door. "We're going to go check on the breakers real quick," he chirped casually, stepping through the door alongside our red-scale companion and disappearing into the darkness. "I don't like this." Favi shivered, glancing every which way as though in expectation that someone would jump out at us. "I'm sure it's nothing," Salkim cooed calmly, leaning forward onto the table and resting his snout in his claws. "Probably just a Jajim nibbling at the wire. Little pests." Creak. The sound of the kitchen door easing open quickly drew toward it our attention. "Ah, Thrick!" the Prime Minister cheered, gesturing toward our table with a somewhat impatient claw gesture. "I was wondering where you—" His response tapered off rather quickly, however, as through the door came not a chef carrying plates of food, but rather a mere metal cylinder tossed in by an unknown shadow, followed by a sound that put my hearth in my throat, the dropping of a pin. "Get down!"